Hey, it's Dave here, and welcome to this video in which we're going to talk about the main differences between stool tests that are run by the medical system and stool tests that you can run privately that we call functional stool tests. Now, we get asked this question a lot, so that's the main reason I wanted to create a video. Why shouldn't I just go to my doctor to run a stool test? And it's a really great question. So over the next 4, 5, 6 minutes, I want to just give my views, my opinions on why I believe personally it's more advantageous to use the private functional testing that is available. So with the medical stool testing, there's nothing inherently wrong with it, right? It's just a little bit limited. So when the medical system, doesn't matter whether that's in Australia or South Africa or the UK or Germany or France or the USA or Canada or whatever it might be, when they run the stool testing, they typically look for a small number of different microbes in there that might be causing disorder or disease in the digestive system. And they're called pathogens. So pathogen, pathogenic means disease causing. And so there's about a dozen, give or take, pathogenic, truly pathogenic organisms that the medical system recognizes as being truly problematic. And they are things like Salmonella, Campylobacter. There's a parasite called Giardia. There's another one called Entamoeba histolytica. There are also certain viruses and things like that as well. But you'll typically need to have some kind of sickness or diarrhea type symptoms for a few days before they will even consider testing. So if you just have a bit of bloating, or you have irritable bowel syndrome, or a little bit of heartburn and acid reflux, or a combination of those symptoms, then it's typically unlikely that the doctors will test. They need more evidence to justify spending healthcare money on these kinds of tests. And so that's why I've written budgetary restrictions in this list here as one of the potential drawbacks with these kinds of tests. So we only have a relatively small number of diarrhea and vomiting bugs that they tend to look for. And they have budgetary restrictions, which means oftentimes they won't even entertain the idea of testing unless you have those symptoms going on. So why don't they test for more bugs? Well, again, in addition to the budgetary restrictions, even though in the scientific literature over the recent 15 to 20 years, and even though thousands and thousands of us functional medicine practitioners or naturopathic practitioners and nutritionists are absolutely clearly aware that a whole range of different bad bugs can cause symptoms. The medical system just doesn't consider many of these other bugs to be problematic, and there's quite a lot of them. So stepping outside this sort of dozen or so major disease-causing bugs, the others are just not recognized in most medical channels. So that's another reason why I think it can be a little bit limited. The technology that is used to assess the stool sample is not that dissimilar to where it was and what it was decades ago. So they still typically rely on analyzing the stool sample under a microscope. There might be a couple of other techniques, sort of staining techniques and things like that they use to try and pinpoint different bad bugs. But for the most part, the microscopy method is still used. Now that's okay, and it can find things. It's not that it's wrong, it's just maybe a little bit outdated. And the reason it's outdated is that when we look at the scientific literature over the last probably 15, 20 years, as I say, most of the research has been done using upgraded technology. And so they're using DNA analysis to look at the microbiome, to look at the yeast, the fungi, the viruses, the bacteria, and the balance between all of those organisms. And that DNA analysis has enabled us to make all of these forward steps in understanding the microbiome in general. So we kind of owe it to that technology to have the level of knowledge that we currently have about what goes on in the digestive system with regard to all of these microbes. And so there's a bit of a gap there between the technology used to assess the stool sample in the medical setting and the technology that's actually available and that's being used to make all these fantastic discoveries. Now, that doesn't mean that the medical tests are bad. I still think if you can get one of these and you can get it without having to pay for it out of your own pocket, it's worth doing. But I think once you understand the benefits of using the functional testing, you'll see why we typically prefer these methods. And so with the functional testing, you get to examine and evaluate for many, many different bugs. And it's not just the bad bugs. So these private labs understand that there's a wider range of potentially bad bugs in the system that can overgrow. They're not necessarily pure infections, but they can overgrow in what we call dysbiosis and cause major problems. And sometimes the bacteria and the yeast and fungal organisms that we actually are supposed to have in the gut microbiome can overgrow and cause problems. So they can be friendly, but then turn unfriendly if they kind of grow out of control. That's a completely different model to having some kind of pathogenic infection. So what you get with these tests that you do privately is a whole range of different markers assessing your microbiome. It still looks for these pathogens, but it looks for much more beside that. And it can also tell you if you're actually too low in some of the friendly microbes as well. The technology used by some of the labs now is in alignment with the kind of technology that's been used in the scientific research setting, which is namely, let's have a look for these organisms' DNA rather than trying to find the intact organisms, right? And that's a big leap forward in terms of our ability to understand what's going on in the digestive system. There are a lot of additional markers in the functional testing that tell you about how well your digestive system is getting on. So rather than just focusing on bad bugs, which is pretty much what most of the medical testing does, there are markers like lactoferrin, calprotectin, and things like that to indicate inflammation and what have you in the stool tests. And they do look for blood in the stool test as well, which might mean that there's some bleeding going on somewhere in the digestive tract from a bleeding ulcer or some kind of inflammatory bowel disorder, possibly even cancer. But you get that also with the functional tests as well. But also you get to see whether your pancreas is pumping out optimal amounts of digestive enzymes. You get to see whether you are digesting your fats properly or whether there's too much fat in the stool, which can then give you an idea about your liver, gallbladder, pancreatic function. You get to understand your immune system. This marker called IgA, secretory IgA, if I just note that down there, SIG-A, that's a marker for your immune response in the digestive system. And if the SIG-A is low, it means that immune system is worn out. It's just not firing up. And that's one of the reasons why you probably have bad bugs and dysbiosis. If it's too high, then it means that your immune system is actively fighting something. It's being aggravated or irritated by something. So you can then look at, well, what's causing that? Is it something that's overgrown in my system? Is it something that I'm eating, et cetera, et cetera? And I think another advantage of the functional testing is that it's kind of on demand. You dictate when you have this test done. You press the order button and you buy it and you get the test kit in the door and you can have that done in no time at all. Whereas sometimes with the medical system, you've got to sit there trying to convince the doctor or the gastro specialist, on your knees begging, please give me this stool test, please give me something that I can actually explore that might give me some answers as to why I'm not feeling well. And so you're at the disposal, if you like, the beck and call of the doctor rather than being able to make your own free decision on how you want to go about handling these situations. So there's nothing inherently wrong with the medical testing at all. It does find things for people, but if you want to take control and understand things a little bit more deeply, look for more potential reasons why you are having digestive problems than the ones that are going to be looked at here, then these kinds of functional stool tests can be a godsend for you. And this is the kind of test that I used to find out what was going on with my digestive system all the way back in 2007. And we've run several thousand of these with clients now. And we can say with absolute certainty that they can be a huge benefit in helping uncover what's going on so that you can then laser focus your attention on exactly which action steps are needed to get you to feel better. So if you'd like more information on how to run these functional tests, there's some links beneath this video window. You can email us, leave some comments underneath the video as well, and we'll get back to you. So I hope this has been helpful. In subsequent videos on stool testing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to completely break down all the different markers that you will find on these functional tests so that you can understand exactly what they all mean and how they're beneficial. So I look forward to seeing you on the forthcoming videos, and I will catch you soon. Thank you.